"What do you think you're doing on my land?" I barked as I strode into the heart of the freshly christened dog park. Victoria Preston's polished smile wavered under the weight of my anger. She turned toward me, unbothered, diamond bracelet catching the sun. "Mr. Caldwell, we've been over this. This land now belongs to the community," she said smoothly. I raised the weathered legal document I'd carried in my back pocket. "By sundown, you either acknowledge my water rights, or every single home in Sycamore Estates goes dry." Gasps rippled through the gathering. Victoria's expression shifted from fake concern to barely concealed panic. "You wouldn't," she hissed. I turned toward the crowd. "Ask your HOA president about the luxury condos she's secretly planning. This park is just the bait. You don't forget the sting of betrayal, especially when it's dressed in tailored linen and forged paperwork. My name is Thomas Caldwell. I'm 55, and my family has worked this same 15-acre stretch of soil since 1887. Ours was the last working farm in a suburb that has traded character for concrete. Our barn, built by my great-grandfather, stood proud and tall until bulldozers reduced it to rubble, following an order signed by people who had no claim to the land it stood on. This farm is more than just dirt and tools. My great-grandfather bought this land with gold coins he'd earned in Pennsylvania coal mines. He chose this spot for the natural spring and fertile soil, dreaming of a future better than the one he escaped in Europe. That dream has been passed down through 4 generations, each of us adding to it. During the Dust Bowl, when the rest of the region wilted, my grandfather refused to let our farm die. He worked with university hydrologists to design an irrigation system that would later serve the entire county. He spent every cent the farm made for 3 straight years to build a network of underground pipes, pumps, and reservoirs. That system, his legacy, still flows beneath our feet. And he made sure it couldn't be taken away, drafting water rights that were legally airtight. When developers moved in during the 90s, I made sure Caldwell Farm stood its ground. I negotiated with Westland Development to remain independent. No HOA nonsense, no annexation. That agreement was signed, stamped, and stored in both their offices and the county records. For decades, we grew award-winning organic produce. Schools, shelters, farmers markets, we fed thousands. My wife, Emma, and I raised our kids with the same values my ancestors lived by. Work hard, respect the land, and protect your roots. Then Victoria Preston moved in. She brought with her a Chicago law degree, manicured contempt, and a plan to sanitize the neighborhood. Within weeks of becoming president of the Sycamore Estates HOA, I started receiving weekly letters accusing my property of everything from architectural violations to noise pollution. The barn was too tall. The silo was unsightly. The rooster was too loud. But my land wasn't under their jurisdiction, and I had proof. Still, I tried to reason with her. I offered to give her a tour, hoping she'd see what the farm truly meant. Maybe she'd change her mind if she saw kids from Washington Elementary learning to grow their first carrots, or the veterans tending to lavender beds as part of their therapy program. She arrived in a spotless white Range Rover, armed with HOA board members and a DSLR. Instead of learning, she documented. "This isn't personal," she said as she snapped photos of our tools and compost. "We just want to maintain a certain standard." The next morning, her former law partner showed up on my doorstep with a clipboard and a checkbook. I didn't open the gate. They thought I'd fold like everyone else. They didn't count on the hidden veins of power running beneath their precious homes. Those underground water lines, they're fed by a system built on my land. A system my grandfather engineered. And according to documents they overlooked, the legal control of that water remains mine. They stole my barn, so I turned off their sprinklers. Not out of spite, but out of principle. Let them feel, just for a moment, what it's like to have something essential taken from you. Maybe then they'll understand what this farm truly is. A legacy not for sale, and a heritage not so easily erased. They offered me $750,000 for land easily worth 3 times that. When I declined, his friendliness vanished. "You may want to reconsider, Mr. Caldwell," he said, his voice dropping low. "That old barn your grandfather raised, the heirloom crops, the creek where your children learned to fish. What are those worth next to what we're offering? People who resist change tend to find things complicated. When intimidation didn't work, the harassment escalated. Fines appeared out of nowhere, no legal basis. Inspectors kept arriving, responding to anonymous tips. They claimed I was contaminating the water. Nothing was found. Someone even reported my livestock to animal control. Every animal was healthy, documented, and certified. My friend and lawyer, Michael Ramirez, dug into the development records. They have no legal claim on your property, he told me. After reviewing everything, we issued a cease and desist, which brought a short-lived peace. Then came the survey markers. They lined up along the eastern field, my richest soil, where I grew the tomatoes 5 restaurants depended on. That's when I realized this wasn't pressure anymore. It was preparation. They intended to take it. April 18th, a Tuesday I'll never forget. I was dropping off organic vegetables at Washington Elementary when Emma called, her voice frantic. They've got bulldozers. They're tearing down the fence. Hurry. I left the crates on the school's back step and tore home in my truck. When I arrived, the oak fence posts, over 100 years old, were shattered. 2 yellow bulldozers rolled forward, heading for the barn where we kept the antique tractor, the heirloom seed vault, generations of tools and memory. A crowd had gathered. Some watched in stunned silence. Others, neighbors I once trusted, nodded in approval. Victoria stood behind the police tape, holding a sleek leather folder. 2 officers stood with her, one later identified as Deputy Jason Brooks, her brother-in-law. When I tried to stop the destruction, Brooks shoved me back and cuffed me. "You're trespassing," he said smugly. "This is my land," I yelled. "You can't do this," he sneered. "County approved. Should have taken the deal, old man." From the back seat of the cruiser, I watched helplessly as the barn crumbled under metal teeth. Emma had been recording everything, until they seized her phone, claiming she was interfering. What they didn't know was that Michael had urged me to install hidden security cameras. They caught it all, including Victoria whispering to the bulldozer driver, "Tear that eyesore down completely. We want unobstructed views for the condos." Her slip would later cost her everything. 6 hours passed before they let me go, no charges filed, because there were no legal grounds. When I got home, neighbors had gathered with casseroles and fierce indignation. The document Victoria had brandished, the so-called seizure order, was a fake. Michael confirmed it with the county administrator. Forged letterhead. No authorization. "They've crossed the line," Michael said, trembling with fury. "Forgery, vandalism, trespassing, and fraudulent misrepresentation." He filed for an emergency injunction while I surveyed the wreckage. The barn was gone, the soil torn up, fencing already installed, with a shiny new sign, "Preston Community Dog Park, coming soon." The hearing was set for 9 o'clock the next morning. Emma and I didn't sleep. The sky looked foreign without the barn's silhouette. Before dawn, we brewed coffee and spread out every paper we had. Title deeds, maps, contracts, water rights, every thread tying us to that land longer than Victoria Preston had been alive. At the courthouse, we were met by Victoria's lawyer, and Judge Walter Phillips, silver-haired and sun-bronzed. We later learned he golfed every weekend with Victoria's husband. Their case was absurd, that the land had become part of the HOA through adverse possession. They had nothing but smoke. I laid out the documents with shaking hands. My father had taught me to guard them like treasure. The original deed from 1887, bearing my great-grandfather's signature. The water rights certificate from 1912, granted during a historic drought. The 1994 agreement, explicitly stating that the farm was exempt from HOA annexation forever. Then we played the footage. Silence swept the room as Victoria's voice echoed off the courtroom walls. Asterisk, make sure that barn's completely gone. We need a clear view for the luxury condos. Asterisk, her face drained of color. My client has presented evidence of intent to deceive, destroy, and defraud, Michael said. This isn't about a dog park. This is about illegal land seizure. Judge Phillips shifted in his chair, uncomfortably aware that his golfing partner's wife had cornered him with a conflict of interest. The judge reluctantly granted us a temporary injunction. It halted further development, but crucially, it didn't reinstate my ownership. Property rights will be resolved at trial, he ruled, setting a court date for 3 months out. Have you ever found out your ancestors left behind something invaluable, just when you needed it most? This tale reveals how one farmer's grandfather, long gone, had the foresight to leave behind a legal safeguard, decades before it was ever needed. That evening, as Michael and I reviewed the case in my farmhouse kitchen, we stumbled on a game-changer. "Take a look at this," Michael said, pointing to an old clause in the brittle 1912 water rights agreement my grandfather had drafted during a historic drought that crippled nearby farms. "Your family retains sole control over the aquifer and irrigation system, with residential access allowed only if property boundaries were respected and agriculture was prioritized." The wording was dense, but the meaning was clear. My family still legally controlled water distribution to the entire subdivision. The agreement wasn't just protective, it was enforceable. "My grandfather always said the water system would protect us," I murmured, recalling dusty afternoons when he'd walked me through the pipeworks, his voice steady and certain. I hadn't understood it then. I did now. Michael's expression shifted as he fully absorbed the magnitude. He didn't just build a water system, he created the region's first private water utility, before such things were regulated. He pointed to another faded line in the document. "And here's the real hammer. If agricultural rights are ever infringed, you can shut off residential water with 30 days' notice. No court approval necessary." When the Sycamore development went up, they'd connected to our infrastructure instead of laying their own water lines to save money. That shortcut was about to backfire badly. The next day, Michael submitted a discovery request seeking communications between the HOA board and developers. What we got back confirmed every suspicion. Emails between Victoria and Skyline's project managers laid bare their agenda. The dog park? Just phase 1 of Preston Heights, a high-end condo development with private amenities, on land stolen from me. One particularly incriminating message read, "The old farmer doesn't know what he's sitting on. Once we get the deed, we'll renegotiate water access or force it through eminent domain. Either way, ROI will be worth it." What they didn't realize was that eminent domain couldn't override our water rights without compensation, and that would cost them millions and years of legal battles. By bulldozing my land without due process, they had broken the very terms their water access relied on. "They just sunk themselves," Michael said with a grin that reminded me of my grandfather outfoxing a dishonest cattle buyer. I looked at the pages again, my grandfather's graceful signature anchoring each one. He'd been gone 40 years, but somehow he was still protecting this land. While the legal process crawled forward, Victoria behaved as though she'd already won. Crews installed ornate fencing, imported benches, and fancy waste bins. Flyers for Preston Park promised a premium community amenity, opening in a month. Meanwhile, I contacted Gabriela Torres, a respected water rights attorney who had spent 3 decades defending farmers. After studying the documents, she said, "These are among the strongest claims I've ever seen. Your grandfather structured them masterfully." We immediately issued formal notice to terminate all residential water access due to easement violations, giving 30 days written warning as required. Emma and I hand-delivered copies to every HOA board member and all 200 residents. Some slammed doors in our faces. Others listened, visibly concerned. A few, particularly long-time residents who remembered the original development agreements, openly supported us. Victoria called an emergency HOA meeting, dismissing our notice as an empty bluff. "He can't cut off water to an entire neighborhood," she scoffed, her diamond bracelet flashing as she waved aside resident concerns. "The county will step in." But her experience in corporate mergers hadn't prepared her for rural water law. Our rights predated current regulations and were shielded from external interference. The county engineer, who had once worked with my grandfather, had already told us our claim was airtight. With the deadline approaching, I contacted the local press. Investigative journalist Rebecca Parker picked up the story, digging into Victoria's ties with Skyline and the rubber-stamped approval process behind the park. Then, day 31 arrived, the grand opening of Preston Park. Residents gathered, children laughed, and dogs played among the agility gear and designer fountains. Red ribbons were cut, and Victoria toasted with champagne. Dressed in my usual farm gear, faded overalls, blue chambray shirt, and my straw hat, I walked straight into the park, water rights folder in hand. After addressing the crowd and issuing a final warning, I returned home. That afternoon, Emma and I headed to the old pump house my grandfather had built from Riverstone. Inside, metal valves and levers lined the walls. With Emma recording, I turned the main wheel, diverting flow away from the residential pipes into our irrigation reservoir. It wasn't immediately obvious. Faucets ran on residual pressure, toilets flushed with what was already in the tanks. But by 2 p.m., lawns in Sycamore stopped watering. By 4:30, faucets upstairs sputtered. 6-0. Victoria's toast was interrupted by texts from panicked residents. No water at all. Toilets won't flush. Is the water main broken? Within the hour, county utility trucks, not police, arrived, along with media vans tipped off by concerned homeowners. The county water engineer reviewed my documents in front of gathered residents and announced, "Mr. Caldwell is within his rights. The easement terms were clearly breached by unauthorized land seizure." Victoria called me around 8 p.m., her voice trembling with desperation. "Turn it back on. This is illegal." "No," I replied, calm and firm. "I followed every legal step. You trespassed, violated easements, and built on stolen land. The water stays off until my land is restored." The demands were clear: complete restoration of my land, full compensation for damages, and a legal guarantee that my property would remain free from HOA authority. Until that was honored, I suggested everyone in Sycamore Estates get used to bottled water. By morning, the effects were undeniable. Showers ran dry, toilets stopped flushing, and kitchen appliances sat idle. Manicured lawns browned under the harsh sun, pools turned murky. But what surprised everyone wasn't just the inconvenience, it was the divide that followed. Instead of uniting against me as Victoria had hoped, many residents turned their outrage toward the HOA board that had caused the chaos. Neighbors like Robert and Claire Wilson, who had always cherished the quiet beauty of the old farm, organized a meeting without HOA oversight and asked me to speak. The community center overflowed. I didn't arrive with a polished speech or dressed for court. I came straight from the fields, hands still rough with dirt, wearing the same clothes I wore every day. I wasn't there for revenge. I came with proof. Detailed plans Victoria had hidden from residents, copies of forged documents, and footage of the destruction. The most shocking discovery was that HOA funds had been used to carry out the illegal land seizure, putting every dues-paying resident at risk. I told them plainly, I didn't want to hurt families or stir trouble. I just wanted my family's farm, cultivated for 5 generations, to be restored and protected. That evening, local news aired an explosive report. Victoria's husband had received $250,000 in developer stock options days before demolition began. A blatant conflict of interest, never disclosed. By day 3, the tide had fully turned. A petition demanding the board's resignation had signatures from 85% of the neighborhood. Suddenly, I wasn't a nuisance. I was a neighbor fighting to keep something sacred alive. The county judge called an emergency session. The room overflowed again, this time with residents wearing handmade buttons that read, "Save Caldwell Farm." Victoria arrived flanked by high-powered lawyers. I came with documents and clear demands. After reviewing the evidence, Judge Mendoza didn't hold back. She called it one of the clearest violations of property rights she'd seen in 3 decades. She affirmed my legal right to water access and openly criticized Victoria for her role in falsifying legal records. Criminal charges, she warned, were not off the table. That night, a newly elected interim board, led by the Wilsons, accepted every term I laid out. Rebuilding the barn exactly as it stood before, full financial reparations, and a permanent exclusion from HOA oversight. I turned the water back on immediately after the agreements were signed. The judge even added a buffer zone, no construction within 100 feet of my land. As I stepped out of the courthouse, Dozens of neighbors approached me. Not with blame, but with gratitude, with offers of help. That day marked more than just a legal victory. Something bigger had shifted. Victoria resigned soon after. Her mansion went on the market. The district attorney launched an investigation, and her law license was suspended. Meanwhile, the new board worked with me to create a preservation initiative to protect the farm forever. Rather than seeing the land as an obstacle, they began to celebrate it. The fields were resown with help from volunteers. People who had never gotten their hands dirty came to plant heirloom crops and build fences. They helped reconstruct my family's barn using traditional methods, hand-hewn beams and all. A small educational center was added, giving local students a chance to learn about sustainable farming. The community hosted monthly dinners made with produce grown on the farm. These gatherings became so meaningful that other neighborhoods began replicating them. The developers abandoned their condo project, and public backlash led to new laws protecting farmland, named somewhat unexpectedly after me. Through all of this, I learned more than just how fragile property rights can be. I saw firsthand how quickly power can be misused when no one's watching. Victoria had wielded her authority without accountability, and it nearly cost the neighborhood something irreplaceable. But when the truth came out, people didn't cling to pride or convenience. They chose to act with integrity. The struggle forced everyone to reevaluate what truly matters in a neighborhood. Is it uniformity and polish? Or is it a connection to place, to history, and to something lasting? In the end, most people chose preservation, and the farm they once ignored became the soul of the community. I also came to appreciate the foresight of those who came before me. My grandfather didn't fight for water rights just to feed crops. He did it to protect something deeper, something enduring. He knew that fertile soil and clean water were worth more than market value. They were a legacy. In rebuilding what was almost lost, we created something better. The farm and the community now live in harmony, not conflict. My neighbors understand where their food comes from, and I better understand their desire for a vibrant neighborhood. The greatest lesson? Real community leadership doesn't come from enforcing rules blindly. It comes from nurturing relationships, finding balance, and making room for both individuality and shared purpose. When decisions ignore their human impact, they lose all meaning. Standing in the barn rebuilt with neighborly hands, I realized the irony. An HOA tried to erase history, but instead helped make it. They thought legal tricks could replace roots. But some rights, like the right to preserve your legacy, don't need to be shouted. They just need to be remembered.